I thought running from my family's rejection and a lover's betrayal would kill me, until a storm left me dying in the Rocky Mountains. Then he appeared, a lone hunter with secrets as deep as the woods. What started as survival became a forbidden love that forced me to confront my past. But could we overcome society's judgment and our own demons? This is my story of heartbreak, redemption, and the man who showed me what true acceptance feels like. I wasn't just leaving Denver behind, I was fleeing a life that had crumbled under the weight of secrets and lies. At 28, I'd built what I thought was a stable existence, a decent job in graphic design, a circle of friends who seemed supportive, and a relationship with Mark that promised forever, but forever shattered when I came out to my family. My parents, devout and traditional, had always preached love, but their version came with conditions that felt like prison walls closing in around my authentic self. "This isn't you, Alex," my father had said, his voice laced with disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could have. "You're confusing a phase with reality. Think about what this does to us, the family name, our standing in the church community, everything we've worked to build." My mother cried bitter tears, begging me to pray it away, as if my identity was nothing more than a spiritual stain they could scrub clean with enough righteous effort. They cut me off financially and emotionally with surgical precision, leaving voicemails that oscillated between desperate pleas and righteous condemnations like a broken record of conditional love. "We love you, but we can't condone this lifestyle," one particularly painful message had declared, the word lifestyle dripping with judgment that made my skin crawl. The church meetings became unbearable after that Sunday when I'd finally found the courage to tell them the truth about who I was. Pastor Williams pulled me aside after service, his usual warm smile replaced by a stern frown that spoke of disappointment and barely concealed disgust. "Your parents shared their concerns, Alex. We need to discuss your struggle with temptation and find appropriate resources to help you overcome this challenge." He handed me pamphlets about conversion therapy with the same enthusiasm he'd once shown when giving me youth group leadership materials, speaking in hushed tones about healing and redemption that felt more like threats than promises. The congregation's eyes followed me differently now, some with pity that made me feel like a wounded animal, others with barely concealed disgust that confirmed every fear I'd harbored about small-town religious communities. Sarah Martinez, who'd been my Sunday school teacher years ago and had always treated me like a favorite nephew, crossed herself when I walked past her pew. "Such a shame," she whispered to her husband, deliberately loud enough for me to hear every word. "He was such a good boy before this happened to him." The implication that my sexuality was something that had been done to me rather than an integral part of who I'd always been stung worse than outright hatred might have. Worse than family rejection was Mark's ultimate betrayal, a knife twisted by someone who'd promised to protect my heart. We'd been together for 2 years, sharing whispered dreams in our tiny apartment, building what I thought was a foundation of mutual trust and understanding. I'd trusted him with my deepest vulnerabilities, including my bone-deep fears of rejection and abandonment that stemmed from a lifetime of hiding essential parts of myself from a world that seemed determined to punish authenticity. But when things got rocky between us, arguments over my reluctance to be publicly affectionate, disagreements about attending pride events together, tensions around his frustration with what he called my internalized homophobia, he weaponized every intimate detail I'd ever shared with him. One night, after a particularly heated fight about commitment and visibility, he outed me at his company's holiday party, casually mentioning my secret to colleagues amid laughter and holiday drinks, treating my private struggle like entertaining gossip. The next day at my own workplace, whispers turned to uncomfortable stares and awkward silences that followed me through every hallway and meeting room. My boss pulled me aside with obvious discomfort, citing team dynamics and workplace culture concerns as reasons for my sudden layoff, corporate speak that couldn't quite mask the homophobia underneath. Friends I'd considered loyal began ghosting me systematically, some sending texts that felt like form letters. "I support you personally, but this makes things awkward for the group dynamic, and I hope you understand." Mark himself vanished from my life with cruel efficiency, blocking my number and social media accounts, but not before posting cryptic rants that painted me as the villain in our relationship's demise. "Some people can't handle real commitment when it requires actual courage," he wrote in posts that garnered likes and supportive comments from mutual acquaintances who never bothered to hear my side of the story or question his sudden narrative revision. The apartment we'd shared became a prison of memories where every corner held traces of betrayal. The coffee mug he'd insisted on keeping despite its chip, the books we'd read aloud to each other on lazy Sunday mornings, the photo of us at last year's Pride Parade that I'd hidden in my desk drawer because he'd been too scared of workplace consequences to display it openly. I spent sleepless nights on that couch, scrolling through his social media accounts, watching him rebuild his life while mine crumbled around me like a house built on fundamentally unstable ground. Heartbroken and isolated beyond anything I'd ever experienced, I packed my SUV with essentials, a tent, clothes, a cooler of food, and camping gear I hadn't used since college, and hit the road toward the only refuge I could imagine. The Rocky Mountains called to me like a distant promise of anonymity and peace, their vast peaks offering the possibility of disappearing completely from a world that seemed designed to punish people like me for daring to exist authentically. I drove west from Denver with desperate determination, past Boulder and into the winding highways of Roosevelt National Forest, watching urban sprawl give way to towering pines and air that grew crisp with the scent of earth and evergreen. I blasted music to drown out the echoes of rejection that seemed to follow me like persistent shadows, songs about lost love and broken dreams that mirrored my pain with uncomfortable accuracy. This is freedom, I told myself repeatedly, gripping the wheel tighter as roads narrowed into gravel paths that promised escape from everything that had defined my life until that moment. No more pretending to be someone I wasn't, no more hiding essential parts of myself to make others comfortable, no more accepting crumbs of conditional acceptance. Just me and the wilderness where judgment couldn't reach and love couldn't betray. But the mountains, as I would soon learn, don't care about human plans or desperate hopes for easy escape. They have their own rules, their own dangers, and their own ways of testing whether someone truly belongs in their harsh but beautiful embrace. Deep in the backcountry, near a remote trailhead in the Indian Peaks wilderness where cell towers couldn't reach and civilization felt like a distant memory, my carefully planned escape began to unravel with mechanical precision. My SUV's engine started making strange clunking noises, followed by smoke curling from under the hood like a bad omen written in gray wisps against the pristine mountain air. I pulled over on a desolate stretch, surrounded by dense forest and sheer cliffs that seemed to mock my urban helplessness. Popping the hood revealed a mechanical nightmare I had no skills to address: overheated radiator, what looked like a busted hose, fluid leaking onto ground that would soon freeze. My phone displayed that mocking, no service icon I'd seen in movies but never experienced firsthand, a digital reminder of how completely alone I'd become. Panic bubbled up from my chest like acid, but I forced it down with the same determination I'd used to survive family dinners that turned into interrogations about my lifestyle choices. As dusk fell, the sky darkened ominously with clouds that rolled over the peaks like an advancing army bent on conquest. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that built into a roar echoing off canyon walls with increasing menace. I grabbed my backpack and sleeping bag with hands that shook from more than just cold, scrambling for shelter under a rocky overhang that offered minimal protection from what was clearly going to be a serious mountain storm. Rain started as gentle drops that seemed almost welcoming at first, then unleashed in torrential sheets that turned the world into a gray nightmare where visibility dropped to mere feet. Wind whipped through the trees like furious spirits bent on destruction, bending massive pines until I feared they'd snap and crush me where I huddled like a terrified animal. Lightning illuminated chaos in stark detail, branches snapping with sounds like gunshots, mud sliding down slopes in miniature avalanches, rocks tumbling from heights I couldn't see in the darkness. I huddled in my sleeping bag, soaked through despite my attempts at shelter, shivering uncontrollably as the temperature plummeted beyond anything my urban experience had prepared me for. Cold seeped into my bones like ice water in my veins, turning thoughts foggy and disjointed. Fever set in quickly, my body weakened from days of poor eating and the emotional stress that had driven me to this desperate flight from everything I'd once called home. Coughs racked my chest with increasing violence while my mind wandered to painful flashbacks of unrequited crushes in high school, boys I'd admired from safe distances, while fearing the judgment that would come if anyone discovered my secret longings. Tommy Rodriguez from chemistry class, whose laugh had made my heart skip beats until I learned he was dating Jennifer Walsh. Michael Chen from the track team, whose friendship had meant everything to me until he started avoiding me after rumors began circulating about my sexuality like poison through the school's social ecosystem. Why can't I just be normal? I'd wondered then, the same question that had echoed through my childhood and now seemed to mock me from the storm itself. Hours blurred together in a kaleidoscope of pain and delirium, where past and present merged into one continuous narrative of rejection and isolation. The storm intensified beyond anything I'd ever experienced, hail pelting down like accusations from an angry sky, each ice chunk a reminder of every harsh word my family had spoken. I imagined Mark laughing at my plight from the safety and warmth of whatever new relationship he'd already begun building, my parents shaking their heads in vindication, This was what happened when you chose sin over righteousness, they would say with the satisfaction of proven prophets. Exhaustion overtook me completely. I collapsed onto muddy ground, no longer caring about staying dry or warm, whispering desperate pleas into the howling void that seemed determined to swallow me whole. "Someone, please help me," but only wind answered, howling my isolation back at me with cruel indifference. My phone's battery drained steadily in the cold, its useless screen reflecting nothing but my own desperate face illuminated by lightning flashes. As blackness crept in around the edges of my vision, I wondered if this was how my story would end, dying alone in wilderness, rejected by love and society, becoming nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in church pews about the wages of authenticity in an unforgiving world. The fever dreams that followed were twisted kaleidoscopes of memory and hallucination, where faces morphed and voices echoed with supernatural cruelty. My mother's disappointed expression transformed into Mark's cruel smile as he announced my secret to rooms full of strangers. My father's voice recited Bible verses about abomination and damnation, while thunder provided percussion for his righteous condemnation. My sister stood silently by in these visions, too afraid to speak up, too trapped in webs of conditional love to offer real support when it mattered most. But salvation, as I would learn, sometimes comes in forms we never expect, riding through morning mist on hooves that beat rhythms of hope against sodden ground. Sometimes rescue arrives wearing the face of someone who understands exile intimately, someone who's learned. The first hint of rescue came with rhythmic thudding of hooves on sodden ground, a sound that penetrated my fevered consciousness like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. I stirred from delirium with eyelids heavy as lead, body aching like it had been battered by more than just the storm's physical assault. Through haze of rain and my own blurred vision, a silhouette emerged, a man on horseback, cloaked in morning fog that swirled around them both like something from dreams or fairy tales. Ryan, as I would later learn, was 35 years old, a hunter who had carved out solitary existence in these mountains after his own brutal encounters with heartbreak and societal rejection. He lived in a modest cabin tucked away in a hidden valley, sustaining himself through trapping, foraging, and occasional supply runs to distant towns where he was known, but not truly welcomed by communities that viewed his lifestyle with suspicion and barely concealed judgment. That morning, while checking carefully placed traps after the storm had finally passed, he had spotted my abandoned SUV glinting in weak sunlight that filtered through heavy cloud cover. Something about the scene troubled his hunter's instincts, the urban vehicle positioned too close to dangerous terrain for any experienced outdoorsman to have chosen willingly. Years of reading subtle signs of the mountain's moods and dangers told him someone was in serious trouble, possibly dying while he stood there deliberating whether to get involved. He dismounted swiftly, his horse, a sturdy brown mare named Belle, snorting steam into chill air, ears pricked forward with alertness of an animal accustomed to wilderness dangers. Approaching cautiously, he called out in voice gravelly from years of speaking more to animals than people, "Hey, you okay down there?" His tone carried genuine concern mixed with wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily or assume good intentions from strangers. I managed a weak croak that barely qualified as speech. "Help, please." Words scraped my throat raw, but they conveyed desperation clearly enough to galvanize him into action. He knelt beside me with practiced efficiency, assessing my condition with eyes that had seen plenty of survival situations in his years of mountain living. Hunters know life and death intimately, understand how quickly wilderness can claim the unprepared or unlucky. "You're in bad shape," he muttered, feeling my forehead with calloused hand that was surprisingly gentle despite its obvious strength. "Fever's running high and you're soaked clear through. Hypothermia's setting in fast. Can you stand?" I tried, summoning what little strength remained, but my legs buckled like saplings in windstorm, muscles refusing to support my weight despite my desperate willingness to try. Without hesitation or complaint, he scooped me up in arms made strong from hauling game and chopping wood for survival, lifting me as if I weighed nothing despite my adult frame. His movements were efficient and sure, speaking of someone accustomed to emergency situations where hesitation could mean death in environments that showed no mercy to the weak or indecisive. Placing me carefully on Belle's broad back, he mounted behind me, my fevered body pressed against his chest for stability and warmth that felt like salvation itself. The ride was jostling yet secure, his warmth cut through bone-deep chills like lifeline thrown to drowning man. I drifted in and out of consciousness during that journey, catching glimpses of towering pines and rocky outcroppings, feeling steady rhythm of Belle's gait and solid presence of my rescuer behind me. His arm across my chest held me steady while occasionally I heard him murmur reassuring words. "Almost there, just hang on, you're going to be fine." though I wasn't sure if he was talking to me, to himself, or to his horse, who seemed to understand the urgency of our situation without needing explanation. The trail wound through increasingly dense forest, following paths that seemed invisible to my untrained eye, but were clearly familiar to Ryan through years of wilderness living. We crossed streams swollen by storm runoff, Belle picking her way carefully across slippery rocks while Ryan guided her with subtle shifts of weight and gentle vocal commands that spoke of deep partnership between human and animal. We arrived at his cabin as sun finally broke through storm clouds, illuminating scene that seemed almost mythical in its rustic beauty and promise of safety. The structure was built from sturdy logs, weathered but well-maintained, with stone chimney promising warmth and wide porch that spoke of evening contemplation under star-filled skies. It nestled against backdrop of golden aspens that shimmered in newfound sunlight, leaves whispering secrets in mountain breeze that felt like benediction after the storm's fury. Inside, the space was undeniably functional, yet surprisingly welcoming despite its Spartan nature. Wood stove dominated one wall, iron surface scarred from years of faithful service, while sturdy table bore marks of countless meals and projects that painted picture of careful preparation and mountain wisdom. Shelves lined walls, filled with mason jars containing preserved foods, dried herbs, and various supplies that spoke of someone who understood value of self-sufficiency in places where help was days away at best. Ryan helped me to narrow cot position near stove, peeling off my drenched layers with efficient care that spoke of experience with emergency situations where modesty was luxury nobody could afford. "Gotta get you dry and warm," he said, averting his eyes respectfully as he handed me oversized thermal clothing from his personal stash. The garments hung loose on my frame but were dry and warm, infused with scent of wood smoke and mountain air that somehow felt like safety itself made tangible. He stoked stove with practiced movements, flames crackling to life and spreading blessed heat throughout small space, then moved to kitchen area to brew tea from herbs he had foraged, chamomile and willow bark to fight fever, he explained, remedies learned from necessity in years of solitary living where doctors were luxuries rather than assumptions. As I sipped bitter but warming brew, feeling life slowly return to frozen limbs, conversation began to trickle out between us like water finding its path down mountainside. "What brought you out here in weather like that?" Ryan asked after I had warmed enough to speak coherently, settling into chair across from me with his own steaming mug wrapped between weathered hands. There was no judgment in his tone, just genuine curiosity mixed with patience that comes from understanding some stories take time to tell properly, especially when they involve pain that cuts to the core of who someone believes themselves to be. Haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency as words found their rhythm and release, I poured out my story like water from a broken dam. Family's complete disownment after I had found courage to come out, how they had cut all ties after labeling my love as not just wrong but actively sinful and destructive to everything they held sacred. They said I was choosing hell over them, I confessed, tears stinging my eyes as memory of that final confrontation played out again in my mind with perfect, painful clarity. My own parents told me I was dead to them unless I repented and changed back into someone I never really was in the first place. The church community that had raised me turned their backs like I had become contaminated with something contagious that might spread if they showed me any kindness or acceptance. Then came Mark's ultimate betrayal, weaponizing my vulnerability and trust, turning my private world upside down with casual cruelty that still took my breath away months later. He promised forever, swore he would protect me from exactly this kind of rejection, but it was all manipulation designed to control me through fear. Now I'm jobless, friendless, completely alone in a world that seems designed to punish people like me for daring to exist authentically. My voice broke on the last words, years of accumulated pain finally finding expression, in presence of someone who seemed capable of hearing it without judgment or attempts to minimize its reality. Ryan listened with intensity of someone who understood pain intimately, his expression softening as my story unfolded, while recognition flickered in his eyes like distant lightning. When I finished, silence settled between us like snow, comfortable but heavy with unspoken understanding that spoke of shared experiences neither of us had expected to find in another person. Then he began to share his own carefully guarded scars, voice carrying years of buried pain that he had never trusted anyone enough to voice aloud. Small-town upbringing in rural Colorado where being different meant becoming target for every frustrated person who needed someone weaker to blame for their own disappointments and failures. Had crush on my best friend in high school, he revealed, words coming slowly as if each one cost him something precious. Jake Morrison, we had known each other since we were kids, spent every summer fishing and camping together, built forts and shared secrets like brothers until I realized my feelings were different from what brothers should feel. I told him once, drunk on cheap beer and teenage courage, thinking maybe he felt something similar and had just been as scared as I was to name it out loud. The reaction had been devastating in its completeness and cruelty. Jake hadn't just rejected him. He had laughed at first, treating confession like elaborate joke, then realized Ryan was serious, and something ugly had twisted his familiar features into mask of disgust and anger. He didn't just say no, he spread it around school like wildfire, told everyone I was freak who had tried to force myself on him, turned our years of friendship into evidence of predatory behavior that had never existed except in his imagination. Lost everything after that. Friends stopped talking to me overnight. Family turned cold when rumors reached them through church networks that connected everyone in town. Teachers looked at me differently, like I might contaminate other students. My own father stopped speaking to me at dinner table, and my mother started praying over me like I was possessed by demons that needed exorcising through enough righteous intervention. His voice cracked slightly as he continued, revealing layers of pain buried under years of solitude that had been necessary for survival, but couldn't heal wounds that went this deep. Moved here after high school to escape stares and whispers, way people would cross street to avoid me or make comments loud enough for me to hear about what happened to boys who couldn't control their unnatural urges. Built this place with my own hands, learned to survive alone because it seemed safer than risking that kind of rejection and humiliation again. Over following days, as my fever gradually ebbed and strength slowly returned to battered body, our tentative bond deepened through shared experiences and quiet moments of understanding that neither of us had expected to find with another human being. Ryan proved to be attentive caretaker, checking on me hourly with medical precision, bringing steaming bowls of rich broth made from venison stock that restored warmth to my bones, adjusting blankets with gentle hands that spoke of someone accustomed to caring for injured creatures. Our conversations stretched late into each night, illuminated by stoves' dancing flames that cast shifting shadows on log walls and created atmosphere of intimate confession, unlike anything either of us had experienced before. We talked about societal pressures that force LGBT people into hiding, about constant vigilance required to navigate world where your very existence could be seen as controversial or threatening to people who had never bothered to examine their own assumptions. We shared stories of internalized shame, ways we had learned to hate parts of ourselves before we had even understood what they meant, exhausting process of unlearning lessons taught by families and communities that claimed to love us while systematically destroying our ability to love ourselves. Worst part, Ryan confided one evening as wind howled through trees outside, was believing for years that they might be right, that maybe there really was something fundamentally broken about me that could be fixed if I just tried hard enough or wanted to change badly enough. His admission resonated deep in my chest because I had carried same poison, same secret conviction that my family's rejection might be justified through some essential flaw in my character that made me unworthy of unconditional love. We began to understand that healing required not just accepting ourselves, but actively rejecting messages about our worthlessness that had been planted so early and so deeply they felt like natural thoughts rather than learned self-hatred. Our growing sanctuary was shattered when Mark reappeared like malevolent ghost. Having tracked my location through social media breadcrumbs, I hadn't realized I was leaving. Hikers had posted photos of my abandoned SUV online, turning my private crisis into viral content that eventually reached his attention through mutual acquaintances who recognized the vehicle from our time together. Driven by twisted combination of guilt and need for control, he made arduous drive up mountain roads wholly unsuited to his sedan, arriving at our cabin with false concern masking deeper manipulative intentions. "Alex, I've been so worried about you, we all have," he called out as he climbed from his car, voice carrying rehearsed emotion that rang hollow against mountain silence. His appearance was haggard from difficult journey, but his eyes held same calculating gleam I remembered from our worst arguments, expression of someone preparing to deploy weapons he had been saving for maximum impact. Ryan tensed beside me immediately, hunter's instincts recognizing threat even without knowing full history between Mark and myself. The confrontation unfolded like nightmare scripted by my worst fears brought to malicious life. Mark began with pleading that quickly shifted to threats when manipulation failed to achieve desired compliance. "If you don't come back with me right now, I'll post everything online, your exact location, photos of you two together, the whole story. Let everyone judge what you've been doing up here in your little hideaway." His words dripped with venom designed to wound and intimidate, each syllable calculated to destroy peace we had built together. Slurs followed that echoed darkest corners of societal hatred we had thought we escaped in our mountain refuge. Freaks like you don't belong anywhere decent people have to see you, he spat, mask of concern completely discarded now in favor of pure malice. But instead of crumbling under his assault as he clearly expected, I found strength I didn't know I possessed, drawn from months of healing in Ryan's presence and growing certainty that I deserved better than Mark's toxic manipulation. Your actions end here, Mark, I said with firmness that surprised even me, voice carrying authority I had never been able to access during our relationship. I'm not your victim anymore, and I won't let you hurt anyone else the way you've hurt me. We radioed Rangers immediately, their response swift and professional as they documented harassment with thoroughness that led to formal charges and restraining orders that would follow Mark for years to come. But while Mark faced legal consequences for his behavior, ordeal had opened wounds we thought were healing and forced us to confront fears that ran deeper than either had fully acknowledged. Ryan retreated emotionally with instinctive self-preservation of someone who had learned that visibility meant vulnerability, that exposure led inevitably to loss of everything precious. What if love always brings this kind of destruction? He whispered during sleepless nights following confrontation. I battled my own demons in wake of Mark's revelations about scope of his betrayal, struggling with waves of shame and self-doubt that threatened to drag me back into darkness I had been climbing out of for months. We nearly broke under combined weight of external pressure and internal doubt, relationships straining toward breaking point that seemed inevitable, until we found courage to be completely vulnerable with each other about our deepest fears and wounds. I spent my 20s thinking about suicide more often than I want to admit, Ryan confessed one night as we sat by dying fire, his voice barely above whisper. Jake's rejection triggered something in me that took years to recover from, if I ever really have. You're first person I've trusted enough to share that with, and it terrifies me that you might leave too once you realize how damaged I really am. I shared my own history of dark thoughts in response, nights after Mark's betrayal when bridges and rooftops had seemed like viable solutions to pain that felt insurmountable and permanent. Only thing that stopped me was stubborn refusal to let them win by destroying me completely. But you need to know it was close, Ryan. Closer than I've ever told anyone, including myself most days. United in our shared understanding of that particular darkness, we made pact to fight not just for ourselves but for each other, to resist gravitational pull of despair that seemed determined to claim us both. We reached out to LGBT support networks, began hosting gatherings for other isolated individuals, transformed our private healing into community resource that helped others facing similar struggles with rejection and isolation. Months passed in gradual reconstruction of trust and hope, seasons changing around us as we learned to believe in possibility of sustainable happiness despite world that seemed designed to punish authentic love. My sister eventually reached out with genuine remorse rather than demands for my return, Mark's arrest having prompted uncomfortable questions in our hometown about roles people had played in driving me to desperate flight. I was wrong to stay silent when Mom and Dad cut you off, she admitted during tearful phone call that began process of family reconciliation I had never dared hope might be possible. Watching what happened with Mark made me realize I was losing my brother through cowardice disguised as keeping peace. Even Mom sent message through Sarah that represented first crack in wall of rejection I had assumed was permanent. She's been praying differently lately, less about changing you and more about understanding what she might have missed. She's not ready for direct contact yet, but wanted you to know she loves you and hopes you're finding happiness somewhere. Ryan's confidence grew through our shared advocacy work, his natural gifts for creating safe spaces becoming legendary among network of friends and allies we helped nurture across hundreds of miles of rural isolation. My writing found audiences eager for stories of resilience and hope, transformation of pain into purpose that gave meaning to suffering that had once seemed entirely senseless. As winter approached our second together, we hosted annual gathering that had grown to include dozens of LGBT individuals from across region, weekend retreat focused on community building and mutual support. Sight of our cabin surrounded by tents and laughter, filled with conversations and connections that spanned every demographic imaginable, felt like fulfillment of dreams we had been afraid to articulate during our earliest days together. During closing ceremony of that gathering, as participants shared reflections on their experiences and commitments for year ahead, I looked around at faces illuminated by firelight and realized we had helped create something genuinely valuable, not just support network, but chosen family that refused to let rejection and isolation have final word in our narratives. Ryan squeezed my hand as last speakers finished their remarks, his touch carrying all warmth and promise of future we continued building together one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. In that moment, surrounded by community we had helped nurture, I understood that survival had transformed into something much richer. We weren't just enduring anymore, we were thriving and helping others do the same. The mountains around us stood witness to another season of growth and connection, their peaks catching starlight and reflecting it back to earth like benediction on all love and healing that had taken root in their shadows. Our story wasn't finished, it was still being written in every choice to remain vulnerable, every decision to extend trust, every morning we woke up and chose each other, and the life we had built together against all odds and expectations. If rejection or betrayal has scarred you, remember that acceptance starts within, blooming in unexpected places among people who recognize your worth when others fail to see it. Courage transforms pain into purpose, isolation into connection, surviving into thriving. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with meeting someone perfect, but with finding someone willing to grow alongside you toward the people you're both meant to become.